So you guys have any scandal questions? There you go. We actually double dated to our high school prom, so go figure, with her husband who's here. I did not marry my prom date, but such is life.
Why? That's the scandal. Okay.
Okay, I'll tell you another day. Anyway, but I first want to just start out by just saying how we miss Bernie here today. He was actually going to follow me up on the stage, and he and I came into the Senate together. And we have been good friends. We've traveled together. We worked on a bunch of issues together, including pharmaceutical pricing. And I somehow picture him there. He's probably watching this on TV right now. And not this, but the forum, just because he has such a fighting spirit, and we hope to see him back on the campaign trail soon. On other news, we introduced our first campaign ad today. It is about the simple focus that I have, that we need to bring our country together, that I don't want to be the president for half of America, I want to be the president for all of America. And it uses some of the debate tape where I said that if you're tired of the noise and the nonsense, and you're tired of the extremes in our politics, you have a home with me. And I think that echoes a lot of the sentiment Americans are feeling right now, that there are people who are in our Democratic base that want to see a change so badly, and that's why you see a fired up group of Democrats all over the country. But there are also people who are moderates, who are independents, including some moderate Republicans who are sick of this guy in the White House. And I think especially after you've seen how he has behaved in the last week, including today, where he threatened someone, this whistleblower, who is simply following the law and reporting something that he thought was a security risk to our country. And then you have the president going after him, accusing him of being a spy, mentioning that the penalties for spying, basically, as we know, is execution. And I think what he was doing when he did that, he was not just trying to squelch that whistleblower, he was trying to squelch any witnesses that come forward. I keep focusing on the fact that this is really straightforward. We have a partial transcript of that call. And we know that the President of the United States tried to get dirt on an opponent, and he did it by going to a fledgling democracy that very much needs our help, our aid, needs our credibility, and asked him for that help right on a phone call with many people we now know listening in, including the Secretary of State. We also know that they then tried to cover it up by putting it on this super secret server. I don't know the name of that server. I heard it's a very interesting name, but it's classified, and what I heard, it's more interesting than super secret server. So that's up to you guys to find out what it is. But it clearly was a server that was not supposed to be used for these kinds of calls, and they were trying to bury it. That's called a cover-up. And that's why I, after learning of the Australian Prime Minister call, similar vein, where he's trying to find dirt and ask another foreign leader to be part of this, I likened this to a global Watergate. And I believe that this is something where the House has to be allowed to move forward. This is a somber proceeding. They have immense responsibility here. And then, of course, if they do end up bringing articles of impeachment to the Senate, it'll be our job to be the jury and make sure that justice is done. But all of this aside, this is a president that just keeps escalating. And that's one of my points about why this was the right time to go forward with impeachment. This was no way about relitigating the last election. This is about ongoing conduct and ongoing security risk, and that's why we must move forward. In the Senate, we have an obligation to do our jobs as jurors in an impeachment hearing, but we also have an obligation to the country to do two things at once, and that is move forward on these pressing issues. One we discussed at length today, gun safety. 3 bills sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk. One, my bill to close the boyfriend loophole, and if you have a question about that, I can explain it, but it really would save a lot of lives. Secondly, the closing the Charleston loophole to give our law enforcement time to vet people who apply for guns, which makes perfect common sense. And third, universal background check. Mitch McConnell, while the House is dealing with the impeachment proceedings, we aren't doing much there in the Senate. except we could pass these bills. We could also move forward on a number of the other bills like election security, which is relevant to the president's call to the Ukrainian prime minister, because again, this is about Russia invading our election. We should pass my bill to require background checks, backup paper ballots as well as audits. These are all things we could be doing right now. We could move on pharmaceutical crisis. And so my hope is that he does move forward. If he doesn't, when we're on the campaign trail running for president, while my friends and colleagues in the Senate are trying to push for legislation, we will continue to do two things at once. That's what we've got to do when we're a leader of this country.
Senator Leader McConnell says that he will take up impeachment if it passes the House. Do you believe him?
According to the rules, he has to take up impeachment, and as you know, Chief Justice Roberts will be the judge of that trial. According to the rules, he has to. He has said it not just once, but twice. He also said it back last spring where he said there'd have to be a trial. My question is this going to be fair? Is it going to be thorough enough? And he has said words that lead you to believe, is he really serious about it that way? When he said, we'll see how long it will last. I just think it's very important that it be fair, that it be thorough. I am the ranking, the leader, the Democratic side of the Rules Committee, so I am very aware of what those rules say, and he has to bring this forward. I would also remind people that if you go back to our founding fathers and the Constitution, the impeachment articles were put in there for this very reason. It was James Madison in the Constitutional Convention who said that we needed to include impeachment provisions because he feared that a president could betray the trust of the American people to a foreign power. That is exactly what we're dealing with here.
You said that you're going to be the president for everybody.
Can we just
Sorry,
go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. It's actually it's related to what you were saying earlier about how you think a lot of Americans are kind of tired of the noise, conflict, infighting, and speaking of Democrats, it seems that there is some concern that regardless of how you view President Trump's allegations to Joe Biden, you think are all lies, or you think they're entirely true, there's some concern that leading up to a general election, when you have a candidate with so much baggage, like Joe Biden has, sort of how Hillary Clinton had a lot in 2016, that it could really seriously damage Democrats' prospects in 2016, or at the very least, if Joe Biden were to win, just we're back to politics as usual in the Senate with Republicans saying there's a scandal here. I mean, what do you think of that, described that way? I mean, are Americans kind of ready for a fresh start? Is that a problem with Joe Biden?
I'm not going to comment on Vice President Biden's campaign. I have tended to focus on my own. And let me make the argument for me. I am someone who's from the Midwest. This is the area that we didn't win in the last election, specifically Michigan and Wisconsin, Iowa. Then if you move over a little more to the east, Pennsylvania. That's why I just went on this Blue Wall tour. These states that we won big in 2018 but lost in the presidential in 2016. As I said, we're going to build a blue wall around these states and we're going to make Donald Trump pay for it. These are the states that we need to win. And so I am from that area of the country. I have won every race, every place, every time in these districts, congressional districts, where Trump has won by double digits. 3 congressional districts I won every single time that he has won. And so I have a strong case to make on that. Second thing, in that last debate, I was only one of 3 women on the stage. I think that makes me a different candidate. And then the third thing is I have been able to get things done in Washington through the Trump era, which I think is significant. That was a whole different story when Donald Trump came in. And so understanding the politics of that, understanding where the Republican votes are as well as the Democratic votes. I've passed over 100 bills where I'm the lead Democrat, which is significantly more than any of my colleagues that are running for president who are in the Senate now. And I know how to get things done, especially in the Trump era where I passed over 30 bills. I understand as well, as do my colleagues who've lived through this and been governing in this time, the impact that Donald Trump has had on the citizens of this country. The horror that people feel when you get constituents calling you at midnight because their neighbor is getting deported, their neighbor that's lived next to them for years, or what it feels like for someone to wake up in the morning and be scared just because of the color of their skin. I think having someone that's had that experience these last few years, being in a position of authority, I think that's really important too, because it's been held for a lot of people in this country.
Senator, you mentioned earlier that you're from a Midwestern state. You mentioned on stage with a lot of law-abiding gun owners, folks who enjoy hunting. Can you explain to us how comments like Beto O'Rourke's for mandatory buyback on assault rifles might be a sort of liability for Democrats at large in the Midwest and in these states you just mentioned? We didn't win, you didn't win in 2016.
I just want to focus more on the fact that we're seeing changes with hunters. I think that the problem we've had is we haven't passed one thing when it comes to guns. We haven't even closed the boyfriend loophole, which says that people who have been convicted of serious domestic abuse, they can't get a gun if they're married to someone that they've abused, but they can get a gun if it's a dating partner. It makes no sense at all when half of the domestic homicides are involving people who are dating girlfriends. So I think that our first move should be to focus on those 3 bills that he has on his desk, Mitch McConnell, and then go to the important bills, the assault weapon ban, and do a voluntary buyback. I think that makes the most sense. I do think having someone leading the ticket who's from a state that has a proud tradition of hunting is really important right now, because instead of seeing law-abiding hunters as our enemies, we should see them as our friends. We should reach out to people because there's a lot of them speaking out right now. And Gabby Giffords herself, who's here today, has stood with hunters all over the country because we're seeing a sea change. I think that's the way you get these things done. You think about gay marriage. How did that get done? Well, that was kids talking to their parents and their grandparents. They reached out, they talked to them in a way that, I don't know, politicians can't do, sometimes moms can't do, but the kids could do it. And that's what the kids are doing right now, especially in hunting families. And I'm not making this up, it's not some Pollyanna thing. We can see the results from 2018, where we had a number of pragmatic Democrats win in really red districts who were willing to vote for universal background check and other gun safety measures. So that's how I see it. And yeah, I think you've got to talk about this in a way that brings people in and doesn't shut them out. If we want to get this stuff done, we're not going to get nearly as much done as Mitch McConnell if he's still running that Senate. We get stuff done if we don't just win and eke by a victory in the White House. We win if we win big. And we win big by winning in states like Arizona and by winning in states like Colorado and Maine. That's how we win big. So you want someone at the top of the ticket that is able to bring those states with us, bring those elected officials down the ticket with you. I think that's why I've gotten more endorsements in Iowa than any of my opponents, both electeds and former electeds combined. That's according to Iowa's starting line, which is the arbiter of all things in Iowa. And I didn't even know this until last week, but it makes sense to me because in Iowa, they really want to win back their House of Representatives, their state house. It's very important to them. And they're looking at who can lead tickets, some of these representatives, and able to bring people with them in a more conservative state without selling out on our values.
Senator,
One last question.
Yeah, I walked up a minute late, so I'm sorry if you already answered this, but there are a lot of U.S. senators running for president at some point in the next couple of months, depending on how fast the impeachment stuff goes. There may be impeachment, trial going on in the Senate. So how does that complicate things for people trying to be U.S. senators and run for president?
Yeah, a very good question. I think I was asked when I was in Detroit. Elizabeth and I spoke to the United Commercial Workers in Detroit, and there was a similar group like this one there. And I was asked that question because Andrew Yang had said, well, I think the best way to win is if we have a candidate that never talks about Donald Trump. At least that's what one of you guys told me. And I said, okay, that is not possible when you have a real job right now when you're dealing with this White House, because we may well be in an impeachment hearing, and I think for 2 reasons. It's important to continue to make the distinction between our party and his party and between us and him every single day. One is that there are voters, nearly 10% of his voters that voted for Barack Obama, that have had promises broken. Those people that live in the states I just talked to, we need to make the case to them that we're a place that they can go to and vote for us, and that we've got a better economic agenda than his trade wars and his ethanol waivers and his lack of doing anything on farmer prices. The second gets to your point, and that is that we are heading into a very solemn and important responsibility here with is an impeachment proceeding and hearing. I believe that this will go beyond politics. Of course, we're gonna be there for the trial. That's our constitutional obligation. I think right when it happened, some of the reporters, I was in Texas and they asked me that, are you guys gonna have to come off the campaign trail? You're not gonna be with all of us at these gaggles? And I said, no, of course, yes, we're going to be at the trial. That's part of our constitutional obligation. The chips will fall where they may, but this is one of the most solemn responsibilities as a member of the US Senate to participate in a hearing like this. I did it once actually in the small group, 15 of us that heard an impeachment. The last impeachment in the Senate was a federal judge from Louisiana, Porteous. And we were appointed by the leaders to hear the case. I remember Claire McCaskill and Jean Shaheen and I would sit together at that. And then we had to report back our findings. Do you know who the prosecutor was? Does anyone know? This case from the House, they brought over the same thing. Adam Schiff. And so he brought the case over, we heard it, and then we reported, our group did, to the Senate, and the Senate ended up impeaching this federal judge. And that took 8 days of our time. We didn't do anything else except that. And so during that time of the impeachment trial, obviously the business of the Senate will be at a standstill. That's why I'm making the case that now the Senate should be moving on these other bills, because once that happens, which looks like it may be in December, since Speaker Pelosi wants to get this, as she has said publicly, done by November, I would think then it would come to the Senate in December. And that's just regardless of the campaign calendar, that's what we gotta do. We've got an obligation to do it, and I think the public will understand. Okay?
Thanks, Ariana.
Thank you.